Why did no one hear her warnings when the valley looked like a trap from the very first map? The heat in Afghanistan could feel like it was designed to crush thought itself. At forward operating base Redstone, the plywood buildings simmered like ovens, every step dragging under the weight of a sun that seemed intent on burning soldiers alive before the enemy even fired a shot. It was under that heat, in a quiet armory filled with the smell of gun oil and dust, that Staff Sergeant Rebecca Winters sat alone, her rifle broken down into precise fragments across a cloth spread neatly over her lap. She worked with a calm intensity that never betrayed her frustration, each motion controlled, mechanical, like she had repeated it 10,000 times before. And she had. Rebecca had been assigned to this room as though it were a holding cell. Other Marines thought of her as a caretaker of weapons, not a sniper in her own right. At barely 5'5", wiry and lean, she looked more like a runner than someone who could shoulder 60 pounds of gear across a mountain. They told her she wasn't meant for combat, too small, too much liability. They trusted her with checklists, not with lives. She had been told, often and bluntly, that she would never see a real mission because no commander would risk her weakness showing at the wrong moment. And yet it was in that dismissal where something dangerous grew inside her: patience. The tattoo hidden under her sleeve said it in a single word, framed by crosshairs inked into her skin. Every day, every hour she was underestimated was another day her edge grew sharper. Every laugh behind her back was another bullet stored in her chamber. What they didn't know was that the overlooked soldier sees more, listens harder, and waits longer. Two Marines walked by the open armory door, their boots scraping across the plywood floor. One of them glanced in, caught sight of her hunched over the rifle, and smirked. "Still babysitting gear, Winters. Surprised they haven't stuck you with counting socks by now." His companion chuckled. "Yeah, can't exactly send her downrange. Imagine that headline back home." They didn't wait for a response. They didn't expect one. They faded into the background hum of the base, generators thrumming, radio chatter bleeding through from the operations center, the distant pulse of helicopter blades. Rebecca didn't lift her eyes. She cleaned the bolt face one last time, checked her barrel against the light for obstruction, and logged another page of her meticulous notebook. Temperature, humidity, wind speed, barrel condition. 3 years of data. Ballistic drop charts written by hand. Wind patterns over the valley ridgelines. Ammunition lot numbers tested against elevation. To anyone else, it looked like an obsessive journal. To her, it was a lifeline. When the mission briefing was called, she was expected to sit at the back, to be present for optics, not for input. Henderson, another sniper, taller, broader, the kind who seemed made to fill out recruiting posters, caught her in the doorway and smirked with the confidence of someone who had never been told he didn't belong. "Briefing in 10. Colonel wants everyone there. Should be good." Finally green-lit the Tangi Valley sweep. "Big op. Easy, turkey shoot." Rebecca looked up just long enough to answer. That valley's a natural kill zone. Whoever planned resistance there knew exactly what they were doing. Henderson snorted. "That's why we're bringing 300 shooters. Overwhelm them, grab the cash back for dinner." He walked away before she could reply, not that she would have. Inside the operations center, the air conditioning fought a losing battle against the desert. Maps lined every wall, satellite feeds shifted on screens, and the smell of burnt coffee clung to every surface. Colonel Brennan, a man who wore his uniform like it was armor against accountability, pointed at a 3D terrain map glowing on the main display. Tangi Valley stretched across it like a scar in the mountains, narrow, long, with ridges towering over its floor. "Gentlemen," Brennan began, catching himself before adding, "and Sergeant Winters." The plan was simple: sweep the valley, secure the weapons cache, extract. On paper, flawless, in reality, suicidal. Rebecca raised her hand. Reluctantly, the colonel acknowledged her. "Sir, those ridge lines create interlocking fields of fire. With enemy positions on the high ground, our forces would be trapped in a crossfire. Limited maneuverability. choke points at both entrances. If they've prepared, our people would be walking into an ambush. Silence fell, eyes turned. Some officers looked at her with irritation, others with something like curiosity. Henderson rolled his eyes in the front row. Brennan's jaw tightened. "Your expertise is noted, Sergeant," Brennan said sharply. "But intelligence has confirmed the operation. The tactical value of denying those weapons outweighs hypothetical concerns." "With respect, sir." "That will be all, Sergeant." The words cut like a blade. She closed her notebook slowly, feeling the familiar burn of humiliation in her chest. Better not to argue. Better to stay quiet, invisible, until invisibility became impossible. That night in her small barracks room, barely large enough for a cot and a desk, she studied the maps again. The valley stretched northeast to southwest, 12 kilometers of terrain designed to slaughter whoever dared move through it. If she had been planning it, she would have done exactly what her gut told her the enemy had already done. Heavy weapons dug into the ridge lines, overlapping fields of fire, ambush triggered only when the entire force was inside. A chess match where every move had already been made, and her side didn't even know they were the pawns. She thought of her father, lost to an IED in Iraq when she was 16. Her mother, taken by cancer 2 years later, both in uniform, both gone. The military wasn't just her career, it was her inheritance. And now she was being asked to watch 300 men walk into a trap because the people who commanded them preferred the comfort of their own certainty over the discomfort of one inconvenient voice. By dawn, she stood outside the operations center, watching the SEALs prepare. They were good, disciplined, careful, every detail checked twice before stepping into danger. Captain Eli Stone moved among them like he was born for it, his presence steady, his words quiet but carrying. He wasn't arrogant like Brennan. He was the kind of leader soldiers trusted. That trust would mean nothing if the ground swallowed them whole. At 6:47, the first vehicles rolled into the valley. Rebecca monitored from the command center, her headphones filling with routine chatter, position reports, weather checks, the unremarkable rhythm of experienced operators. For 12 minutes, it sounded like every other mission. Then it changed. Contact left, heavy weapons fire, RPGs, machine guns on both ridges, mortars incoming. The voices blurred into chaos. She saw it unfold on the screens, burning vehicles, scattered soldiers scrambling for cover that didn't exist, muzzle flashes raining death from every angle she had warned about. Her pen froze over the notebook. Brennan shouted for air support. Controllers pushed back, danger close, no safe parameters. Command demanded separation. The SEALs shouted back, negative, pinned, kill zone. The words repeated, frantic, hopeless, kill zone, kill zone, kill zone. And in the background, Captain Stone's voice cut through, calm but breaking. "We cannot establish separation. We are dying in place. Request immediate reinforcement or alternate extraction." The answer came hours later in the voice of General Holloway. He studied the feeds, the casualty reports, the rising numbers. His jaw set. Then he said the words that dropped the bottom out of Rebecca's chest. "We need to discuss tactical withdrawal." Withdrawal, a clean way of saying abandonment, acceptable losses. Major Hayes tried to push back. Rebecca couldn't stay silent. She stepped forward, her voice cutting through the room. "General, systematic elimination of ridge positions can break their coordination. One shooter could disrupt command nodes. Buy time for reorganization." Brennan snapped before Holloway could answer. "We have no sniper assets in position." Rebecca's reply was quiet, but it silenced the room. "You have me." Henderson laughed out loud. Brennan's face darkened. Holloway asked almost softly, "How long to Widow's Peak?" Rebecca flipped her notebook open. 4 hours to position, full coverage of the valley, clear sight lines. I can do it." Brennan cut her down instantly. "Absolutely not. You're dismissed, Sergeant." But Rebecca wasn't listening anymore. Not really. She heard Stone's last transmission instead, ragged with exhaustion, ammunition critical, casualties mounting. Please, we need extraction now. No help was coming, not from command, not from anyone who cared more about reports than lives. She stood, tucked her notebook into her pocket, and walked toward the door. "Where are you going, Winters?" someone called. "Bathroom," she said, not breaking stride. The Afghan sun struck her like a hammer as she stepped out. Generators rumbled. Marines moved through their routines. She walked straight to the armory, signed out her rifle, her ammunition, her gear. Every line neat, correct, by the book, right up until she didn't walk to the range. At the motor pool, a Humvee idled for a supply run. Corporal Fletcher looked up from the checks. "Orders." "Communications relay. Sentinel post," she lied smoothly. "Priority tasking." He hesitated. She looked him in the eye. "It's time-sensitive, Corporal." He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Minutes later, dust rose behind them as the Humvee carried her north, toward Widow's Peak, toward 300 men who were running out of time, toward the choice no one else would make. Rebecca sat with her rifle across her lap, the notebook heavy in her pocket, her mind already calculating wind and elevation. She was walking away from her career, from safety, from the last shreds of obedience. But she wasn't walking away from them. Because orders weren't supposed to mean leaving your own to die. Not in her world, not in her father's. She leaned back against the seat, staring at the mountains rising ahead like jagged teeth against the sky. Somewhere in those shadows, men were fighting, bleeding, waiting for a rescue that command had already decided would never come. She would be that rescue, even if no one had asked, even if no one believed, even if it cost her everything. How far can one woman carry the weight of 300 lives? The Humvee's tires bit into the dirt road, throwing up plumes of dust that shimmered in the Afghan sun. Rebecca sat in the passenger seat, her rifle across her lap, her notebook pressed against her thigh like a second heartbeat. Corporal Fletcher drove with the quiet focus of someone who knew better than to ask too many questions. The desert stretched around them in every direction, barren, ancient, merciless. 20 minutes outside the wire, Rebecca broke the silence. "Drop me at the Eastern Trail Junction. Report back to base. Tell them you delivered me to Sentinel Post." Fletcher tightened his grip on the wheel. "Ma'am, there's no equipment in this vehicle." "I know, and you're not going to Sentinel, you're going back to Redstone." For a long moment, Fletcher said nothing. Then, his jaw working, he muttered, "If you're doing what I think you're doing, I should stop you." Rebecca stared out the window, watching the mountains rise like jagged guardians. "You should, but you won't, because you've been listening to the same radio I have. You know 300 SEALs are dying in that valley, and you know no one else is coming." The corporal's silence was heavy. He was young, 22 maybe, still clinging to the belief that the system worked. But in his eyes she saw the truth forming, the crack of realization. Finally, he exhaled, the sound of someone surrendering to reality. "I didn't see anything. Equipment got delivered. You stayed at Sentinel." Rebecca nodded once. "Appreciate it." "Don't thank me yet, ma'am. Thank me if you make it back." At the trail junction, she grabbed her gear. Rifle, rangefinder, ammunition, water, rations, and her notebook wrapped in waterproof plastic. Everything she needed to either save them or die trying. Fletcher gave her one last look, eyes full of something between fear and respect, then turned the Humvee around. Rebecca stood there, alone now as the dust cloud faded, staring at the mountains. Widow's Peak waited, sharp and cruel against the sky. She adjusted her pack, settled the weight across her shoulders, and began to climb. The first hour wasn't terrible. The trail wound gently upward through rock and red soil, sparse vegetation clawing at life where it could. The sun hammered down, but she knew how to pace herself. Her father had taught her during long hunts in Colorado. Small steps, steady breathing, let the mountain set the rhythm. Don't fight it. Let it carry you. But by the second hour, the mountain stopped pretending to be kind. The slope steepened. Loose stones slid under her boots, forcing her to use her hands. Her rifle dragged at her back, heavy and unforgiving. Sweat soaked her shirt, drying almost instantly in the brutal heat. She stopped only long enough to sip from her hydration pack, then kept moving. The radio clipped to her vest crackled with chaos from the valley. Voices breaking, gunfire snapping in the background. Captain Stone's calm was gone, replaced by clipped urgency. Ammunition critical, casualties mounting. Enemy fire coordinated. This isn't militia. These are trained operators. We need extraction now. Command's reply was hollow, the same words repeated. Maintain position. Reinforcement inbound. Air assets repositioning. Rebecca pressed harder into the climb. They were lying. Reinforcements weren't coming. Air assets couldn't fire without killing their own. Every minute wasted in the command center was another man bleeding out in the dirt. By the third hour, the trail vanished completely, leaving only raw stone and guesswork. She checked her compass bearings, compared the ridges against her map, and pushed upward through scree that slid beneath her feet like marbles. Every step forward meant half a step sliding back. Her lungs burned in the thinning air. Oxygen felt scarce, precious. At one point, she reached a 30-foot rock face, vertical, unforgiving. No way around it. Her options were to climb or to quit, and quitting wasn't in her blood. She checked the holds, secured her rifle to her pack, and started upward. Halfway, her right boot slipped. For a heartbeat, she dangled by her fingers, the ground yawning below, her rifle clattering against the stone. She forced her breath steady. Panic killed faster than gravity. Slowly, deliberately, she found a foothold and kept climbing. Her arms screamed, her shoulders burned, but inch by inch she pulled herself over the top, collapsing on flat ground, heart racing. She lay there 30 seconds, staring at the sky, then rolled to her knees and kept moving. The radio kept her company, though its words were daggers. Blackwood, one of the SEAL's senior leaders, his voice gravel with age and exhaustion, spoke through static. "We've got wounded who won't last 2 hours. I'm telling you straight, we're not making it through the night without extraction. These men need action, not talk." "Copy," came Command's voice, detached, bureaucratic. "We're evaluating options." "Evaluating," Blackwood snapped. "We've been dying for 6 hours while you evaluate." Rebecca climbed harder, teeth clenched, fury fueling every step. She was the only option left. By the 5th hour, Widow's Peak came into sight, jagged, cruel, thrusting upward like a broken tooth against the sky. She covered the last kilometer in under an hour, body trembling with exhaustion. She forced herself up the final stretch of rock, fighting against gusting wind that threatened to rip her off the mountain. Finally, she crawled into a natural depression just below the summit, a sniper's nest offered by nature itself. Clear sight lines, concealment, elevation. She laid out her mat, pulled her rifle free, checked the scope, the bolt, the barrel, all perfect. She ranged the valley below, 800 meters to some positions, 3,000 to others. The notebook opened, her notes as familiar as scripture. Wind, elevation, temperature, calculations that lived in her bones. Through the scope, the valley revealed its horror. Burning vehicles scattered like toys. SEALs huddled behind scraps of cover. Enemy forces dug in across both ridges, muzzle flashes constant, mortars pounding. The trap was perfect. She pressed her radio. Any station, this is Sierra Whiskey. Overwatch position established. I have clear sight lines across your AO. Authenticate, and I'll provide precision fire support." Silence, then cautious, Captain Stone's voice. "Sierra Whiskey, authenticate your unit and authorization." Rebecca hesitated. She could lie, pretend she was authorized, but she chose truth. "Alpha Actual, I'm Marine Scout Sniper, operating without command approval. I have skills, position, and ammunition. Your call if you want my help." Silence again. She imagined Stone weighing it, unauthorized, dangerous, but their only chance. Finally, his voice returned, tight but resolute. Sierra Whiskey, what's your max effective range? Validated to 3,200 meters. A low whistle over the comm. Then, Jesus Christ, all right, identify enemy command positions. 17 priority targets. Heavy weapons, coordination elements, snipers, standing by for authorization. It took Stone only 5 seconds. You're cleared. Friendlies are marked with IR strobes. Engage at will. Don't hit our people. Rebecca settled behind her scope. Found her first target, a machine gun nest pinning down a SEAL squad. Range, 1,847 meters. Wind gusting from the northwest. Temperature dropping. Elevation differential 892. She adjusted her turrets, exhaled, found the stillness between heartbeats and pressed the trigger. The rifle whispered, suppressed but deadly. Through her scope she saw the gunner collapse. His assistant spun, searching. Rebecca fired again. 2 shots, 2 bodies down. The gun fell silent. She shifted, found a mortar team on the western ridge. Range 2,134. Adjusted, fired, 2 more fell. The mortar went quiet. 1 shot at a time, methodical, relentless, she began breaking the spine of the ambush. And below in the valley, hope began to stir. Captain Stone's voice broke through the radio again, breathless but alive. Sierra Whiskey, whoever you are, you just gave us breathing room. Enemy fire is breaking. We're moving. Rebecca didn't answer right away. She cycled her bolt, chambered the next round, and lined up her next target. Her hands were steady, her breathing even. This was why she had waited, why she had endured 3 years of mockery, dismissal, and silence. This was the moment she had been preparing for. 300 lives balanced on her trigger finger. And she wasn't about to let them fall. Why did the valley suddenly sound like a confession? Every crack of a rifle, and every ragged breath revealing who had failed and who had acted. Night had already folded over Tangy Valley when Rebecca settled into her rhythm. Darkness doesn't erase danger, it refines it. Shapes compress into silhouettes. Thermal signatures become punctuation marks. Under green-tinged night vision, the world is stripped to essentials: heat, motion, the small betrayals of a sleeping body. Her scope turned the valley into a map of light and intent. Friendlies glowed steady as heartbeat strobes. Hostiles flared and faded as they repositioned, tried to probe defenses, adapted to the new reality of a phantom shooter who appeared and vanished like an accusation. First hours had been a surgical assault on the enemy's command nodes. She hadn't been hunting to tally bodies. She had been hacking the nerve centers that made an ambush work: heavy weapons, mortar crews, radio operators, anyone who coordinated the deadly chorus. Each hit scrapped a line from their plan, and beneath that, anxiety metastasized through enemy ranks. Radio chatter grew confused, orders misaligned. The math of the battlefield skewed in favor of the men she had never been allowed to command. But patience, that quiet virtue inked on her forearm, has a cost. She was alone with hundreds depending on the decisions made under her breath. Her ammunition dwindled. Each round clicked out of the magazine was a small death, a tiny removal from the future. She had promised Captain Stone only time, breathing room, a corridor to move, an extraction they could actually reach. She had not promised eternity. Still, the responsibility pressed on her chest like a second weapon. Alpha Actual, Sierra Whiskey movement on the southern approach. 12 hostiles, advanced formation, holding to cut off your withdrawal, she reported when she saw them array. Her hands moved on the turrets as though reflexive. Years of repetition had turned those motions into a liturgy against chaos. She adjusted for wind, temperature drop, the faint Coriolis bias that betrayed itself at longer ranges. Her shots answered the formation, one by one, collapsing leaders and heavy elements until the cohesion bled away. Down in the valley, men started to move. Not yet safe, but moving with the confidence that someone had shaved the edges off their death. She listened to Stone directing phases of withdrawal, shouting encouragement as if that could replace the missing wings of command. Every voice on the radio sounded human now: fear, relief, anger, gratitude braided together. Her world narrowed further when a message pulsed on an intercepted frequency. A voice with clipped cadence and a gravitas she'd heard in briefings identified itself. Nazari. The name carried an intelligence dossier full of menace. A former ANA officer trained by Americans turned ruthless after personal tragedy. When a commander like that speaks, the battlefield listens, and his words were surgical. Find the sniper. Capture her. Bring her in for interrogation. He wanted her alive. That difference altered the horror she might face if captured. Captivity under him promised theater and cruelty, a public lesson they could display as a trophy. Nazari's words rang inside her. He'd been taught in the same schools under the same doctrines. He knew how Americans think. That made him both predictable and dangerous. Predictable because he would use counter-sniper doctrines they'd taught him. Dangerous because he knew exactly how to anticipate an American Mark's tradecraft. Rebecca had one small advantage in the knowledge game. She was not expected to be there at all. Underestimation had always been her shield. Now it had become a weapon. She watched through the scope as a two-man team set up roughly 1,800 meters away, the kind of professional that doesn't fumble with kit. Spotter, shooter. Quick, efficient. They were not militia, they were hunter-killers. Her options shrank: wait and lose the valley, or engage and reveal herself while the enemy focused on the sound signature. She chose to disrupt. Her first shot found the spotter before he could set his observation gear. The primary shooter reacted precisely, but she tracked him too and took him down as he tried to establish return fire. Muzzle flash had given her general location to others, and thermal arrays began sweeping. Across the ridge, search teams triangulated. Positions pivoted toward the eastern corridor. Her previously perfect concealment narrowed to a few tens of meters as they closed in. That's when she made another calculation. Sometimes a sniping fight isn't about who shoots best. It's about who can disappear faster. She cached non-essentials at the primary site, her sleeping bag, some rations, a decoy of warmth, things that would draw the flames of thermal search and keep them looking in the wrong place. Then she moved 30 meters to a secondary platform she'd scouted when climbing in. It was less ideal but still offered sight lines. It also offered a chance to survive long enough for extraction. The Apache arrived like god machines, rotors chopping the night into reverent throbs, sensors unfurling like the eyes of beasts. Rebecca transmitted coordinates, and within moments the sky erupted with precision fire. Hellfire impacts and chain gun runs laced the ridges, collapsing dug-in positions that had kept the valley in a chokehold. For the SEALs, the arrival of air support shifted the tenor of the night from desperate defense to methodical withdrawal. For Rebecca, it meant a temporary reprieve and a new problem. Flames and explosions signal a position, and the enemy's trained eyes would account for her known firing positions when plotting movement. In the lull between strikes, she counted rounds, checked her face to ensure the night vision lenses hadn't fogged, sipped water on a schedule that was packed with survival. 60 rounds had been her loadout that morning. She had perhaps 40 left. Every shot had to be a surgical strike, and yet the enemy no longer behaved like disposable militia. They reorganized into hunting parties, moving with doctrine and discipline. The hunt turned predatory when she realized they wanted her alive. Captors move more methodically. They set traps. They try to hem you in. They prefer the certainty of interrogation to the shame of death because capture can be weaponized. The knowledge of that intent chilled her deeper than any mountain wind. When she moved again, it was with the speed of someone who knows the cost of hesitation. She bit off a route that would take her north and then east, away from the predicted search arcs. She didn't run blindly, she stalked. She used the black geometry of the ridge, shadows of rock, tufts of scrub to mask movement. Each repositioning was a negotiation between speed and stealth. Too fast and muzzle flashes would betray her. Too slow and they would overrun the coordinates. Pursuers were already closing. The first contact was close range. 3 operators had found her old cache. They moved like professionals, not giving ground, sweeping the ridge methodically. Rebecca made the hard choice most snipers dream of and fear at once. She engaged the immediate threat, not for spectacle but for survival. Her shot dropped the lead man. The others went aground, and for a moment the stillness returned, a brittle, temporary quiet that felt like a held breath. A hunter's life is a constant ledger of reckoning. How many you can slow, how many you can send running, and how many you cannot prevent from circling back with reinforcements. The kills she made were not trophies. They were currency bought for seconds. Seconds that turned into minutes. Minutes stretched into hours. Time had become the most expensive thing on the mountain. When she finally moved away from the ridge top and began a descent toward an abandoned village she had memorized in maps at Redstone, she did so knowing enemy doctrine might predict it. Nazari would expect her to move toward human structures. Captors prefer traps disguised as sanctuary. Yet those buildings offered concealment and the chance to catch breath. That is where she intended to create a new set of options. Contact extraction, or disappear into the local terrain until dawn and then walk out. Inside the village, the stone houses gave shadow and sound. The thick walls muffled movement and created acoustic illusions. She cleared a single building with slow, deliberate precision, checking for likely hiding places and exits. This was the part of warfare no one filmed for propaganda, the tedious, stifling art of holding still and listening. Holding still is a moral exercise as much as a tactical one. It is a decision to accept vulnerability in order to keep another person from being exposed. That thought kept her hands steady even as her body trembled. Boots sounded outside. A team cleared the adjacent structure. They moved with practiced courtesy and lethal intent. These were not minds bent on honor. They were professionals following orders. The presence of trained searchers confirmed her calculus. Nazari was pulling every resource he could muster. Capture was preferable for him, information and spectacle. But here and now, that preference meant the men hunting her were also ruthless and disciplined. She chose movement over stasis. A window opening provided escape to an alley that led to scrub and a rise where she could watch and prepare an extraction plan. She threaded through the window with the practiced calm of someone who knows how thin the margin is between breathing and being discovered. As she slid into the alley, a flashlight beam swept the very room she had occupied. Someone shouted. The search turned loud and kinetic. Rebecca dropped into a sprint, the rifle bouncing against her chest, breath a burn in her lungs. The village erupted into light and radio calls. Hunting teams converged like starlings forming around a predator. She moved through shadows that seemed to grab at her boots and pulled herself up a rocky slope toward an overlook she could defend. They fired as she ran. Rounds split stone at her feet and sang across the night. She dove behind cover and returned fire. Her shots were economy. She did not empty magazines into noise. Two fell. The others went low. She moved again, each decision a balance between conserving ammunition and denying pursuit. The mountain was a terrible and honest judge. It punished sloppy movements without mercy. She used that, letting cliff faces and broken rock form the walls of a maze that hid her steps. Eventually, she reached a boulder field where she could slow and check status. 47 rounds left. Water low. Wounds not present but exhaustion simmering. She steadied, breathing slow. The radio offered updates, Apache circling, seals moving, Nazari's voice still on the air instructing capture rather than kill. The tactical calculus had shifted again. The enemy sought her for reasons deeper than the immediate kill. They wanted to make an example. Propaganda is a weapon as lethal as any rifle. That knowledge tightened something in her chest, but it did not break her. She had chosen to act when everyone else had chosen to calculate. There are moments in war when bureaucracy attempts to shade conscience into compliance. She had stepped out of that shade into the unforgiving light. The moral question wasn't whether she had broken orders. It was whether orders meant the same thing as duty. Duty, not rank, had woken her that morning. Duty kept her moving in the dark. As she planned her next move, she thought of the faces below, not abstract cadences on a casualty report, but men who had laughed and argued and missed birthdays. Names. Family ties. The weight of their existence had been entrusted to people who sometimes forgot that policies are written by people with families too. She had vowed, in the hollow hours when sleep had been a joke and hunger a rumor, to turn that forgetfulness into action. Her notebook, waterproof and creased, rested against a rock like an altar. On its pages were the arithmetic of survival, wind tables, elevation notes, calculated drop for long shots. On the margins, in different ink, were notes that felt almost like prayers, reminders to breathe, to count, to wait. She had trained for precision. What she hadn't trained for was the loneliness of that precision. It is one thing to make a shot in a controlled environment, and another to make the shot when the whole world seems to hinge on the copper and lead that obey your will. She had bought the seal's breathing room. She had shifted the mountain's calculus. But the greatest danger remained, the political storm that would come when the dust settled. Commanders would have to reconcile their earlier dismissals with the raw fact that a single soldier had saved a battalion. People like Brennan would find refuge in regulations and paperwork. Her actions would be punished or praised based on a narrative chosen later by people with agendas. That truth was a quiet, present grief. War does not let you be a hero without cost. For now there was only movement, survival, calculation. She sat on her pack and listened. The mountain breathed around her. The world had narrowed to a single, stubborn purpose: make it through the night, keep the men below alive, and accept whatever came after with the same steady face she had shown while cleaning rifles in an empty armory. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, she thought. It simply acts. And she would keep acting. Under what sky does a soldier finally admit she is both hunter and hunted? The stars over Afghanistan that night were uncountable, scattered across the black canopy as though mocking the chaos on the ground. Rebecca lay flat against cold stone, her rifle cradled beneath her cheek, her body pressed so tightly into the mountain that she felt like part of it. Wind pulled at her, tugged loose strands of hair from beneath her helmet, chilled the sweat on her skin until it stung. She didn't move. Movement was invitation. Movement was death. Below, the valley burned like a wound that refused to close. Sporadic fire still cracked through the darkness, echoing off stone walls. The SEALs had shifted positions, finding brief shelter behind wreckage and boulders, reorganizing into tighter formations under Captain Stone's direction. But for every step they gained, enemy fire nipped at their heels. The ambush wasn't broken, not yet. Rebecca's rifle was steady. Her eye followed the faint glow of a hostile muzzle flash half a mile away. She adjusted for wind, for drop, and squeezed. Another body slumped into shadow. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She only exhaled. One more second bought. One more breath given to men who had already run out of luck. But exhaustion gnawed at her. Hours without rest, the climb, the constant strain of calculation and vigilance. Her hands trembled when she pulled water from her pack, and she forced herself to sip slowly, though her throat begged for more. She wiped her lips with the back of her hand and slid back into position, whispering a mantra her father had taught her long ago. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Then a voice cracked over the comms, low, confident, deliberate. American sniper, we know you hear us. You cannot hide forever. Nazari. The name had passed like a rumor through intelligence circles, but here it was a voice given flesh. His accent was Afghan, his cadence unmistakably military, trained by the same schools that had trained her. His tone wasn't angry. It was calm. It was the kind of calm that coils around you, makes you doubt yourself. You are good, Nazari continued, his words bouncing from intercepted frequencies. But you are alone. We will not kill you, we will take you. And when we take you, every man in this valley will see that you could not save them. Rebecca closed her eyes for a moment, the words settling like ice in her chest. Capture, torture, propaganda. Her mind flashed to headlines, to broadcasts where her name and face would be used against her country, against her family. She breathed once, steady. No fear, not now. Fear was indulgence. Fear wasted seconds. She pressed her mic, whispering only to Stone's channel. Do not listen, keep moving west. I'll cut a corridor. Stone didn't question her authority anymore. He only replied, voice raw with fatigue, copy, we trust you. Those words hit harder than any bullet could have. We trust you. After years of being dismissed, mocked, shoved aside here in the crucible of death, she had earned trust. Not through speeches, not through rank, through action. She went back to work. Each shot was a prayer. A machine gunner swept a ridge, silenced. A spotter raised binoculars, silenced. A commander leaned too far into moonlight, silenced. Her world narrowed to reticle and trigger, calculation and consequence. But the enemy adapted. They shifted their approach, moving squads under the cover of mortar fire. Explosions thundered across the valley, shaking the ground, rattling stone loose from the ridgeline above her. Dust choked her lungs. For a moment her scope blurred. She blinked hard, coughed, and found her next target. Her ears rang, but she forced herself steady. Through her scope she caught sight of something strange. A group of hostiles wasn't firing. They were moving along the flank, circling wider than the rest. She followed their path, realizing too late, they weren't chasing the seals. They were hunting her. Rebecca's pulse kicked. She slid back, low and careful, moving from her perch to a secondary position she had scouted. She moved like a shadow, belly scraping stone, rifle cradled against her chest. The squad crept closer, scanning, whispering. Their movements were too disciplined to be local militia. These were trained hunters, Nazari's hunters. She counted them, 6. 2 carrying suppressed rifles, 1 with thermal optics, dangerous, patient. They knew the signs to look for: a scuff in the dirt, a misplaced rock, the faint glint of glass. Rebecca pressed herself deeper into shadow, fighting the urge to breathe too loudly. She thought of her father again, of hunting elk in Colorado. He had told her once, "Animals know when you fear them, so do men." The thermal scope swept past her position once, twice. Each time her heart slammed against her ribs so hard she thought they'd hear it. She'd left decoys, yes, a heat pad, her abandoned sleeping bag, but she knew better than to count on trickery alone. When the lead man raised a hand to signal halt, she understood. They'd found something. Not her, not yet, but something enough to focus them. In that breath she chose. If she waited, they'd pin her. If she acted, she risked the whole squad turning on her. Her finger pressed. The lead man dropped. She shifted, fired again, clipped the thermal operator before he could swing his scope. The others scattered, shouting in Pashto, spraying wild fire into shadows. She rolled hard to the side, tucking against rock, chambering the next round. Bullets smacked stone inches from her face, showering her with grit. She fired again. Another dropped. 3 left. Their fire intensified, erratic but close. She crawled backward, slipped between boulders, then broke left down a slope, her boots skidding against loose scree. She dove into another depression, swung her rifle up, and caught one in the chest as he crested the ridge after her. 2 left. But they were close, too close. The first came down on her position, knife flashing. She swung her rifle, but he slammed into her, the 2 of them tumbling across stone. Pain exploded in her ribs as they rolled. His breath was hot against her face, his knife searching. She jammed her elbow into his throat, twisted, wrestled for control. For a moment she saw herself reflected in his eyes, both of them killers, both of them desperate. She slammed the butt of her rifle into his temple. Once. Twice. He went limp. She staggered up, chest heaving, only to catch the last man rising from shadow, rifle aimed. She froze, too slow to raise her own. A shot cracked, but not hers. The man dropped, chest burst open. She blinked, stunned. Through the smoke and dust, a shape emerged on the ridge. One of the SEALs. She didn't know his name, didn't know how he had gotten there, but he'd covered her in the second she needed most. The comm buzzed. Stone's voice, strained but alive. "Told you we trust you. You're not alone." Her throat tightened. For a moment she couldn't speak. Then she forced the words out. "Keep moving. I'll meet you at the western ridge. Don't stop." The SEAL on the ridge gave her a nod before vanishing back into the fight. Rebecca dropped to her knees, pressing a hand against her side where bruises blossomed from the struggle. Pain radiated, but she ignored it. She couldn't afford weakness. Not here. Not now. She checked her magazines. 32 rounds left. Enough, barely. She looked west toward the ridge line that led to escape. She knew what it meant: more climbing, more fighting, more chance of being left behind. But she also knew they were alive because she had said no when command said wait. And as she slung her rifle and began moving again, she felt something strange cut through the exhaustion, the pain, the fear. Not pride, not yet. Something quieter. A belief that maybe, for the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving in the margins. She was shaping the story itself. Why does the world go so quiet right before the storm returns? Rebecca had felt it before, that strange pause in combat when even the wind seems to hold its breath. She moved through the dark mountain pass with her rifle tight across her chest, her steps deliberate, cautious. Her lungs ached from the climb, her ribs throbbed from the fight, but she kept her breathing even, slow, the way she had trained herself when every shot demanded stillness. The seals were somewhere below, pushing west, bloodied but moving. Their survival hinged on making it through the narrow exit of the valley before dawn, and her role, unasked for but inescapable, was to keep that path open. She crouched behind a boulder and unfolded her notebook. Even in dim red light, the pages carried her father's lessons, the tables and wind notes, calculations scribbled in long nights at the armory. Her fingers traced the ink as if touching the past itself. Every calculation, every number meant lives now. Her pulse steadied. She flipped to the margin where she had written only one word weeks earlier, almost as a challenge to herself: endure. Movement in the valley pulled her eyes back to the scope. Through her optics, she saw hostile units regrouping along the western choke point. Mortar crews setting up, trucks pulling in reinforcements. The enemy had guessed their path. They meant to box the seals in, force them against stone walls until they broke. She whispered into the mic, barely audible. "Alpha Actual, they're waiting for you at the exit. Do not push straight through. Hold position until I clear." Stone's voice cracked back, raw but controlled. "Copy. You're the Blade, Winters. We'll wait." Blade, the word lingered in her chest, sharp and heavy. She had been called many things in her career: liability, burden, babysitter of weapons, but never Blade. She aligned her rifle, measured the distance, 2,743 meters, a long shot but within her comfort. She slowed her breathing, let her heartbeat drop, and squeezed. A mortar operator collapsed before he could adjust his sights. She shifted, fired again. His partner fell. She rolled her rifle left, found the truck's gunner swinging his weapon, and cut him down. Panic rippled through the ambush line. She didn't give them time to recover. Each shot cracked like punctuation in the night, writing a new rhythm over the chaos. For every muzzle flash that sparked against her men below, she answered with silence. "Targets neutralized on your west ridge," she whispered. "Move now." Stone didn't hesitate. His men surged forward. She watched them through her scope, small shadows sprinting between rocks, dragging wounded, carrying each other when legs gave out. It wasn't perfect. War never was, but they were moving. Then a new sound tore through the air, distant at first, growing, the steady thunder of rotors. Rebecca's chest tightened. Helicopters, extraction. No, too soon, too loud. Her blood ran cold when she realized: not American, Russian-built, enemy birds. She adjusted her optics. Two Mi-17s sweeping low over the valley, searchlights stabbing through darkness. Reinforcements. If they reached the choke point before the seals cleared, it would be slaughter. She keyed her mic. "Stone, fast movers inbound. You've got maybe 6 minutes before they close. You have to push everything you've got." "We can't outrun birds, Winters." "Then I'll clip their wings." It sounded impossible even as she said it. A sniper against helicopters. Ridiculous, but she scanned quickly, her mind racing. The pilots weren't her target, not at this range, not with that armor. But rotor systems, engines, fuel lines, a desperate chance. She waited until the first Mi-17 dropped altitude, its floodlights searching the valley floor. She shifted her rifle up, calculated lead, adjusted for angle. Her finger steadied. One squeeze. The round disappeared into the night. For a second nothing, then sparks. The helicopter bucked, tilted, its lights spinning wildly before it corrected and limped higher, smoke trailing. Not a kill, but fear, disruption. The second bird veered sharply, rising to avoid her angle. It broke formation, its searchlight cutting away from the seals. She cycled another round, fired again. Misadjusted. Fired. This time metal flared. The rotor shuddered. The craft banked hard, spiraled lower, and crashed into the side of the ridge in a roar of fire. Rebecca didn't cheer. Her face stayed stone. She only whispered into her mic, "One down, others pulling off, keep moving." The seals ran harder now, desperation carrying them past exhaustion. The valley exit was in sight. Rebecca shifted her scope, clearing the last ridges of hostiles who tried to regroup until her magazines were half spent. Every squeeze of the trigger drained her future but bought theirs. Her body ached, her eyes burned, her lips cracked in the dry wind, but she kept firing. Because if she stopped, if she gave in to the pain, 300 men would never see dawn. And then silence again, the sudden, suffocating silence of absence. The last enemy fighters broke and fled into the darkness. The remaining helicopter turned tail and vanished. The valley, for the first time in 12 hours, was not a kill zone. It was a graveyard. Stone's voice came through, thick with relief. "Sierra Whiskey, you gave us our way out. We owe you everything." Rebecca closed her eyes. The words pressed against something deep inside, something she had locked away after years of being ignored. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to matter. And yet, tonight, she had been the difference between massacre and survival. She lay back against the cold rock, the stars blurring above her. Exhaustion washed over her like a tide. She thought of her father again, of his steady hand on her shoulder as a teenager, whispering during hunts, "Sometimes, Rebecca, you won't get thanks. Sometimes the only proof you did right will be that no one else had to die." She whispered back to the night as if answering him, "I know, Dad, I know." And with that, she forced herself to her knees. The fight wasn't finished. The seals were alive, but getting them home would demand more than bullets. It would demand the last of her strength, her patience, her will. Because even in survival, the storm wasn't over. What breaks first, the body, or the silence you've carried for too long? Rebecca's legs shook as she picked her way down the ridge toward the western exit. Hours of climbing, fighting, firing. Her body was no longer asking for rest, it was demanding it. But her mind refused. She had learned young that fatigue is a liar, whispering that surrender is safer than survival. She ignored it, pushing through the ache, one foot sliding in front of the other on loose stone. The seals were gathering below, silhouettes hunched around, wounded, their movements sharp but weary. Some limped, some leaned on each other, all of them coated in the grime of blood and dust. Rebecca kept her distance as she approached. She was a ghost to them still, a name over comms, a voice that had cut through hell. She wasn't ready for their eyes. Stone noticed her first. He stood taller than most, though exhaustion had bent even his spine. His helmet was gone, his face streaked with dirt, his eyes sunken with lack of sleep. Yet when he saw her, his expression changed. Relief, disbelief, maybe even gratitude, but most of all, recognition. "You're Sierra Whiskey," he said, voice low. Rebecca lowered her rifle, though she didn't sling it. "Staff Sergeant Winters." For a long moment, no one spoke. The seals stared, confusion passing between them. Some seemed startled. Others narrowed their eyes as if wondering if they had imagined her altogether. A Marine sniper, a woman, standing there alive after doing what had seemed impossible. Stone broke the silence. "You bought us every step we've taken tonight. You saved us, but we're not done." Rebecca nodded. "Extraction." "Supposed to be," Stone said grimly, "but command hasn't cleared birds. They're still arguing acceptable risk." He spat the last two words like poison. Her jaw tightened. She knew those words well. Acceptable risk was what bureaucrats said when they decided someone else's death was easier than admitting a mistake. She had defied it already. She would defy it again. "How many walking?" she asked. Stone glanced at his men. 2/3. The rest are wounded, some bad. Will need stretchers, rotation, cover fire. Rebecca crouched, scanning the terrain west. Beyond the valley, the land rolled into scrub, ridges, gullies. Dangerous terrain, but better than the coffin they had just crawled out of. "Then we move. Tonight, before Nazari reorganizes." Stone gave a dry, humorless laugh. "You sound like you're in charge." "I'm not," Rebecca replied quietly. "I'm just not leaving you here." He studied her for a beat, then gave a short nod. "Fair enough, we'll move at your call." That stunned her more than anything, the weight of trust placed in her hands. For years her voice had been silenced, drowned beneath louder, stronger men. But here, in the ashes of an ambush, her word carried. It humbled her, it frightened her, and it steeled her. They began the march under starlight, carrying their wounded on makeshift stretchers cut from broken doors and scrap fabric. Every footstep crunched against gravel, too loud. Every cough seemed to echo. Rebecca walked the flank, her rifle always raised, her eyes cutting through darkness for the faintest sign of movement. The valley behind them loomed like a memory that would never fade. Hours dragged. Her body screamed with each step, but she silenced it. Pain was background noise now. What mattered was the rhythm of survival. Walk, watch, pause, listen. Again and again. At one pause, Rebecca found herself beside a young seal whose arm was bound tightly against his chest, blood staining through the bandage. His face was pale but set with determination. He looked at her, really looked, as though only now realizing who had been saving them from the ridges. "You're the reason I'm breathing," he whispered. Rebecca shook her head slightly. "No, you're the reason you're still walking. Don't give me your fight." But inside, the words burrowed deep. Years of dismissal, of being told she'd never matter, never belong, and here was proof that she had. That her existence had meant life for someone else. It broke something open inside her, something she hadn't realized had hardened. Hope. The night wore on. Twice they froze as distant engines echoed. Once they scattered for cover as a flare lit the sky, searching for survivors. Each time Rebecca's voice steadied them. "Hold, wait, move." Simple commands, quiet but firm. She didn't think, she didn't plan speeches, she just acted. By dawn, they reached the edge of the valley, the ground opening into rolling scrub. The sky glowed pale orange at the horizon, promising another day of relentless heat. Rebecca collapsed behind a ridge with the men, her body trembling with exhaustion. Her water was nearly gone, her ammo halved, but they were still alive. Stone crouched beside her, his voice hoarse but steady. "You did the impossible, but they're not going to forgive you for it." Rebecca frowned. "Who?" "Command," he said simply. "You embarrassed them. You showed them they were willing to let us die. Men like Brennan don't forget things like that." She looked at him, the truth of it cutting deep. She had acted because conscience demanded it. But conscience didn't write reports. Conscience didn't sit in offices, drafting orders that looked clean on paper while men bled into dust. She wasn't naive. She knew the storm that waited for her when she returned. And yet, as she glanced at the men huddled in the dirt around her, wounded, exhausted but alive, she knew she wouldn't change a thing. She whispered, more to herself than to Stone, "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." He heard it, he gave a tired, knowing smile. "Then let's act our way out of this." Rebecca leaned back against the ridge, her rifle across her chest, and stared at the rising sun. She knew more enemies waited beyond the horizon, more battles, more choices that would test her strength. But the hardest truth had already been faced, that orders and duty weren't always the same thing. And in choosing duty, she had chosen herself. What weighs heavier, the silence of the fallen, or the sound of men you save still breathing? The sun climbed higher, bleaching the Afghan sky into a pale, merciless blue. Heat radiated off the stone and scrub, searing skin, pressing sweat from every pore. Rebecca sat hunched behind the ridge with the seals, her rifle across her knees, eyes half closed but never still. Fatigue gnawed at her like a starving animal. She had not slept in more than 30 hours. Her body was a map of bruises and aches, but her mind refused to surrender. The men around her shifted restlessly. Bandages bled through, lips cracked from thirst, hands trembled from exhaustion. Yet they waited in silence, each understanding the gravity of noise, the danger of carelessness. It wasn't discipline alone. It was survival. Stone crouched near her, scanning the horizon. His face was hollowed by fatigue but sharpened by purpose. "We need birds," he murmured, voice low enough not to carry. Rebecca nodded, "and command still hasn't cleared them." His jaw flexed. "They'll leave us here, write us off, call it a miscalculation." She studied him for a moment. Beneath the dirt and blood, his eyes still burned. He wasn't ready to accept that fate. Neither was she. Rebecca keyed her mic to the restricted channel she'd used before. "Redstone, this is Sierra Whiskey. Do you copy?" Static, then Brennan's clipped voice. "You are operating outside authorization. Return to base immediately. That's an order." She swallowed back the bitterness rising in her throat. 300 SEALs alive, sir. Extraction required now." "You've compromised the chain of command," Brennan snapped. "Stand down." Rebecca let the silence stretch. Then quietly she replied, "Not until they're safe." She clicked off before he could answer. Her chest rose and fell, each breath heavier than the last. She knew what she'd just done, cut the last cord binding her to safety. Whatever career she'd had, whatever protection the uniform offered, gone. Stone's hand rested briefly on her shoulder. A simple touch, wordless thanks, wordless understanding. The march resumed. They moved west through scrub and jagged gullies, trading the relative shelter of the valley for open ground. The sun punished them, turning the air into shimmering heat waves. Rebecca walked the flank again, rifle always ready, eyes cutting across every ridgeline. Each shadow looked like a threat, each glint of metal like the eye of a scope trained on her heart. It wasn't paranoia, it was survival. By midday, the first shots cracked. A sniper round shattered stone near her shoulder, showering dust across her cheek. The men dove for cover, dragging stretchers, shouting warnings. Rebecca slid into prone, her rifle already up. She scanned quickly. The shot had come from high ground to the northwest, 1,600 meters out. She slowed her breathing, locked into the glass, and found him. Camouflage. Good concealment, professional posture, not a militia fighter. One of Nazari. She exhaled, squeezed. The enemy sniper jerked back, fell limp. His spotter scrambled, exposed, and Rebecca cut him down too. The SEALs stared at her. None said a word, but she saw it in their eyes. Respect, relief, awe. She didn't bask in it. She chambered another round. The attack intensified. Small arms fire from gullies, RPGs streaking toward their column. Rebecca picked targets with surgical rhythm, collapsing ambushes before they could close. Still, the fight cost them. 2 men went down, one screaming, one silent. The column faltered, then pushed again, carrying their wounded with gritted teeth. Rebecca felt her arms grow heavier with each shot. Her eyes blurred, but she forced herself to focus, whispering her father's mantra, "Slow is smooth, smooth is fast." Hours stretched. By late afternoon, they reached an abandoned wadi, dry riverbed, deep enough to hide in, wide enough to regroup. They collapsed into it like dying animals. Men drank the last drops of their canteens. Some fell asleep instantly, despite the danger. Rebecca sat against a wall of baked earth, her rifle across her lap, staring at the sky. Clouds drifted lazily, uncaring. She thought of her mother, of the nights spent in hospital chairs watching chemo drip like poison. She thought of her father's flag-draped coffin. She thought of all the promises she had made to herself, that she would matter, that her name wouldn't be lost in silence. Stone lowered himself beside her. For a long time, neither spoke. Then he said quietly, "You know they'll come for you after this. Court-martial may be worse." Rebecca nodded, "I know." "Then why?" His voice wasn't accusing, it was curious, genuine. She looked at him, her eyes steady, because someone had to. He studied her face, then leaned back, closing his eyes. That's the difference. Orders tell us what's safe for careers. Duty tells us what's right for people. You chose duty. She didn't reply, but his words settled in her chest like an anchor, heavy, unmovable, real. Night fell again. Cool air replaced the blistering heat, but with it came new dangers. Movement along the ridges, shadows slipping closer. Nazari hadn't given up. If anything, he was tightening his net. Rebecca lay flat in the dirt, eyes through her scope, body shaking with fatigue. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "Endure." And in that single word, she found strength, enough to line up the next shot, enough to keep 300 men breathing one more night. Because sometimes survival wasn't about winning. It was about refusing to surrender, when surrender was the easiest thing to do. What price does a soul pay when survival is finally won? The second night bled into dawn with no promise of relief. Rebecca lay curled into the dirt of the wadi, her cheek pressed against the stock of her rifle, her eyes burning from hours of unbroken vigilance. Every nerve screamed for rest, but rest was betrayal. She had watched too many bodies carried out of this valley to risk adding more. The seals stirred as the horizon cracked open with light. Pale gold brushed over stone and scrub, revealing faces hollowed by exhaustion, uniforms shredded, bandages dark with blood. They had survived somehow through 2 days of hell, but survival without escape was nothing. Captain Stone crawled to her side, his voice rasped raw. "Command won't send birds. I don't think they ever will." Rebecca didn't look at him. Her scope was still locked on the ridges, scanning, counting, waiting. "Then we walk." "They'll hunt us every step," Stone said. "They already are." Silence, then he gave a slow nod. "Then we walk." The column rose again like a broken animal dragging itself forward, stretchers lifted, packs shouldered, weapons clutched in trembling hands. Rebecca moved to the flank, her rifle steady despite the tremor in her muscles. The ground stretched endless ahead, each step a wager against collapse. Hours passed. The sun returned with its cruelty, heat hammering down, air shimmering. Men staggered, fell, rose again. Rebecca's world narrowed to numbers. Paces between cover, rounds left in her magazine, heartbeats before her finger squeezed the trigger. At midday, the final ambush came. Nazari had said it perfectly, fighters pouring from gullies, fire raining from high ridges, mortars bracketing the path ahead. For a heartbeat, despair threatened to crush her. This was it, the end. But then something inside her broke loose, not with panic but with clarity. She had already lost everything that could be taken from her, her career, her safety, her place in the system. All that remained was choice. She dropped into prone, rifle snapping to her cheek, and began her work. Each shot a sentence, each target a line erased from death script. She moved faster now, smoother, her mind silent, her body automatic. The seals surged under her cover, firing back, dragging wounded, shouting to one another. Nazari's fighters faltered, the ambush unraveled, and at last the battlefield fell silent. Rebecca lay there, chest heaving, her rifle smoking, her hands trembling. Around her, men stood alive. Bloodied, yes. Broken, yes. But alive. Stone approached, dirt streaked across his face, eyes wide with something like reverence. "You did it. You saved us." Rebecca shook her head, voice barely above a whisper. "We saved each other." For a long moment they just stood there. Then Stone raised his radio, calling for emergency pickup. Against expectation, against Brennan's objections, someone higher finally broke. Birds were inbound. When the helicopters thundered overhead an hour later, dust and rotor wash filling the air, Rebecca stayed on the ground, rifle across her knees, watching as men she had saved were lifted into safety. No one cheered. No one laughed. They were too spent for that. Survival had no sound but breath. As the last bird prepared to lift, Stone crouched in front of her. "You're coming with us." Rebecca hesitated. When we land, they'll put me in chains. He nodded. Maybe, but every man here will speak your name first, and that matters. She let the words sink in. Then she rose, slung her rifle, and climbed aboard. The flight back was silent. Men slept where they sat, heads against bulkheads, rifles still clutched in hands. Rebecca stared out the open door, watching the valley recede into distance, shrinking into shadow as though it had never existed. But she knew it would never leave her. It would haunt her every night, every breath. And maybe that was the cost. Maybe that was the price for choosing duty over orders. When they landed at Redstone, officers waited, faces carved from stone, eyes sharp with judgment. Brennan stood at the front, lips tight, jaw set. Rebecca stepped down, her boots touching the ground with the weight of inevitability. Stone moved first, limping forward, his voice rough but steady. 300 men walked out because of her. Don't you dare forget that. Others joined. One by one, SEALs stepped forward, their voices hoarse, their bodies broken, but their testimony unshakable. Brennan's face hardened, but he said nothing. He couldn't. Not against the truth standing before him. Rebecca didn't speak. She didn't defend herself. She didn't need to. Her actions were already carved into the lives around her. That night, alone in her barracks, she opened her notebook. The pages were smudged, sweat-stained, torn. She wrote a single line at the bottom of the last page, her handwriting shaking but certain. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. She closed the book, set it on the table, and finally let herself sleep. And for the first time in years, she dreamed not of being dismissed, not of being invisible, but of standing in the open, rifle in hand, unflinching beneath the weight of her choice. Because in the end, she hadn't saved them for glory or recognition or even survival. She had saved them because it was right. And that was enough.